This is one of the most popular bands out there. They've sold a lot of records. A lot went gold, a lot went platinum, and right now, they're currently on their end of a road tour. Before I talk about that, I'm going to be talking about their entire history of the band, starting with at the beginning. Alright, at the beginning. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. Their real names are Kai and Vitz, which Gene later switched over to Gene Klein before he switched over to Gene Simmons. Paul's real name is Stanley Eisen before he changed it to Paul Stanley. And they were both in bands with a guy named Steve Carnell. Gene's band was called Bullfrog Beer, and I'm not sure what Paul's band's name was. But they both had demos before they were in the band. They were in a band together. Gene's demo was called Letta, and Paul's demo was Stop, Look to Listen. And in these demos, you could hear early on what their styles were. You can tell that Gene was influenced by the Beatles. You can tell that Paul was into hard rock, which is pretty cool. And when they met up, they teamed up and joined and made Wicked Lester, which was the first band that Gene and Paul were in together. And in Wicked Lester, they had some songs that wound up being Kiss songs, like She and Love Her All I Can. And most songs kind of stayed Wicked Lester songs. And they had a contract with Epic Records, and it didn't last very long because Gene and Paul weren't happy with what they were doing in Wicked Lester. So they broke up the band, and they just got rid of their contract with Epic Records. And Gene and Paul wanted to form a new band. They wanted to, in their own words, they wanted to be the band that they never saw on stage before. So, first things first, they had to get a drummer. And they called up this guy named Peter Criscola. We all know him as Peter Criss. And Gene asked him if he would do anything on stage. Would he wear makeup? Would he wear a dress? And they became like a trio for the most part. They rehearsed at a loft, the 10 East 23rd Street loft, and everything was going great until Paul said that they were missing a lead guitarist because they were missing like the solos. So they auditioned for a lead guitarist, and there were two guys that were interested in the gig. Well, two guys worth mentioning that were interested in the gig: Bob Kulick and Ace Frehley. Bob Kulick was on first, but Ace came in and obviously beat out Bob Kulick. And that's how the original four got together. And they all came up with their original characters, but by seeing Alice Cooper. And they were kind of like, why don't we come up with 4 Alice Coopers, but they're all different. They're all unique. So Gene's character was the Demon, Paul's was the Star Child, Ace's was the Space Ace, and Peter's was the Catman. And then, they went into like the club days. The first known club performance that they did was at Coventry. Coventry is actually a pretty good performance that they've done, and there's actually footage of that that they put on Kissology, and also it shows that they were ready to perform. Another club performances is the Daisy. Now, what's cool about that performance is that there's a very early Kiss song that never really went anywhere other than the clubs. It's Life in the Woods. It's a cool little song that they did for the clubs, but it's cool. I just love hearing it. You got to hear a very early version of of. It's an early version of Let Me Know, but they played it under the name of Sunday Driver, which is still pretty cool. And also during the club days, the makeup wasn't as refined as it normally is, but it's still pretty cool to see it that way. And also, when it was time for them to have their first gig outside of the club at the Hotel Diplomat, there they would meet the guy that would become their manager, Bill O'Connor. And after the show, he told them he wanted to be their manager. And I think it's good that he did, because he was a damn good manager for Kiss. And during this time, they went into the Bell Sound studio to record some demos, and Eddie Kramer produced them. And Neil Bogart was looking for his first group for his new record label, Casablanca Records, and he heard Kiss's music, and he thought, these guys sound really good, and I want to sign them. These guys are going to be the records. However, Neil Bogart was only into Kiss's music. He had no idea what Kiss actually looked like. So, when he saw Kiss in makeup and into that whole thing whatsoever. But still, he kept them. And I think it's cool that he kept them. And even when it came time to shoot the photo shoot for their first album cover, Neil Bogart even asked, "Hey, do you still want to wear the makeup? Because we can do this without the makeup." And the band said, "Our way or the highway." And in 1974, Kiss has released their new album, which is pretty cool. Features the songs like Strutter, Deuce, Black Diamond, Cold Gin, Firehouse, and Let Me Know. And it has Kiss in Time, which, Neil Bogart wanted Kiss in Time on there, and also Love Theme from Kiss, which is kind of whatever. And also when they were touring for this album, which was flat out called the Kiss Tour, Paul was transitioning to another, which I thought was pretty cool. He was going back and forth from character to character. However, the band was not going to be a permanent character in Kiss for much longer, because it was axed pretty quickly. Kiss's first TV appearance to promote the album was on the Mike Douglas Show, where you had Gene in full costume and get-up going on Mike Douglas with Toady Fields and whatnot, and it looked so out of place, but yet it was so hilarious. Then they played Firehouse. Then at the end of the song, Gene breathed fire, which leads as the fire breathing that Gene does. The first show that Gene breathed fire, which is interesting, but it's also showing the dangers of breathing, of the fire breathing. So yeah. So while they were still touring for so we're still touring for their first album, they went into the studio and made another album, which was Hotter Than Hell. And Hotter Than Hell is a good album. People generally don't. People generally say that the production quality is not that good. Like, it sounds muddy. Personally, I think that the album sounds really good. Like, I like the songs on it. The songs on the album were Got to Choose, Coming Home, Strange Ways, Going Blind, All the Way, and Mainline. And Harder Than Hell, of course, the title track. And that would be the introduction of Kiss's new look, the Hotter Than Hell era. And that would be the beginning of Kiss making a new album and changing their look. Gene had a new costume. Paul did not have a shirt because he just recently got the rose tattoo. Ace had a costume. Peter's costume was different, I think. I know Gene's was different. I know Ace had a costume because in earlier pictures of Ace, all he had was that jacket on, which was, yeah. And Kiss's second TV appearance in '74 was ABC's In Concert with Dick Clark. The first song they did was Nothing to Lose, and they had another TV appearance later, but we'll talk about that when the time comes. Moving on to the Hotter Than Hell tour, the Hotter Than Hell tour would take them to Indiana and San Francisco, where the famous black and white Winterland performance was performed at. And that video performance is really good. It showcases what '74 era Kiss had. And I kind of enjoy that performance. It's really damn good. And also, moving along to '75, we go to Dress to Kill. Dress to Kill was their third studio album, and it had songs like She, Two-Timer, Ladies in Waiting, Room Service, Anything for My Baby, and most famously, Rock and Roll All Night. Now, the one thing I will say about the first three albums, they're all good, except there was one small snag that they ran into when making these albums. They weren't selling very well. And the reason for that is the albums didn't sound like Kiss when they did live. So, in order to make up for that, they would make a live album. And So during 1975, they were mostly recording for the live album. And all through 75, they chose the one spot and one spot only was Detroit. And now, of course, Detroit was the spot for the album, but there were spots that that songs were recorded in, and they put it on a live. Like Cleveland was where Rock and Roll Night was recorded in, alongside Let Me Know, which that's pretty cool. So yeah, Rock and Roll Night was not recorded in Detroit. It was recorded in It was recorded in Cleveland, and they put that recording in the live album, which is pretty cool. And throughout my entire time listening to audio of the '75 tour, there's a bunch of recordings of Ladies in Waiting. And there's only one recording of Rock Bottom, which is in Long Beach. I would have liked it if Ladies in Waiting would have made it on there also, but, you know. So, Kiss records Alive, and Casablanca goes bankrupt. So, that's kind of bad news. But they didn't go broke for very long, because Alive soon became the most popular Kiss album out there at the time. And they couldn't keep Alive on store shelves. And once Alive was out there, Kiss became a pretty popular band. And then when it came time to make the next album, they got producer Bob Ezrin, who produced Alice Cooper, mostly, to produce their next album, Destroyer. And this is where it becomes troublesome, because Ace, during recording of Destroyer, Ace wouldn't show up to record for Destroyer. So mostly on the Destroyer song Sweet Pain, that's not Ace's solo. He did record a solo for Sweet Pain, but in the original Destroyer album, they did not use his solo. They used a guy named Dick Wagner to record the original solo. However, in Destroyer Resurrected, you actually get to hear Ace's solo, which is pretty cool. And Destroyer is pretty much the well-known, popular album. It has all the popular Kiss songs that Kiss is still playing to this day. God of Thunder, Gene's trademark song for blood spitting, Do You Love Me, Shout It Out Loud, and Beth, and Detroit Rock City, I can't forget about that song. And Beth was a B-side to Detroit Rock City, but the radio flipped it on the B-side and was playing Beth over Detroit Rock City, which to me is kind of hilarious. Because Kiss thought Detroit Rock City would have been the hit, not Beth. Well, they thought wrong. And Beth was like a really huge hit for Kiss. It even, that song won a Grammy, which is pretty cool. And also, during in '76, they made a TV appearance that is pretty well known among Kiss fans, which is the Paul Lynde Halloween Special, where you had Paul Lynde, Margaret, who was the Wicked Witch in the Wizard of Oz, and Kiss. Like, that was such a cool special to watch, and to this day, it's still pretty cool. And later, in '76, Kiss would make another studio album in the same year, Rock and Roll Over. And that would have I Want You, Take Me, Calling Dr. Love, Ladies' Room, Mr. Speed, See You in Your Dreams, Making Love, Hard Luck Woman, and Love 'Em and Leave 'Em. Now, Rock and Roll Over is a pretty good Kiss album, and I like that album. I especially love Calling Dr. Love. Ladies' Room is good. Like, that whole album is good, to be honest. And when it came time to tour for the album, they were still keeping the same look they had for Destroyer. Because in early '76, Kiss was still using the same look they did for Alive. They were going into they were doing like a European tour in early '76. They were doing all that. They were promoting Destroyer in early '76, playing Flaming Youth after Hotter Than Hell and Firehouse, which I found pretty interesting. So before Destroyer was even made, they were still wearing their Alive costumes, but they were playing Destroyer songs. So I did find that pretty interesting. Anyways, back to Rock and Roll Over. They were still wearing the Destroyer costumes. They were still wearing the same outfits. Only thing that was different was the set list. They added in Making Love. They added in Ladies' Room. And, it's pretty cool. And the Rock and Roll Over tour took them out of '76 then into '77, which then the Rock and Roll Over tour also took them to Japan, which Japanese audiences were excited that Kiss was coming to Japan. Ace described it as like the Beatles coming to America, which, okay, that's pretty accurate. And when they did arrive to Japan, they basically played everywhere in Japan in '77, and the most famous place that they played in Japan was Tokyo, which has like a soundboard that has video footage. Um, yeah, that whole Japan tour of '77 is pretty popular. There's another Japan tour coming up later that I'll talk about. Um, so, still in '77, Kiss were, was making another album, and also changed their look yet again. And the look was pretty cool. And the album name was Love Gun, which has songs like I Saw Your Love, Christine 16, Got Love for Sale, Shock Me, Hooligan, and Love Gun is the first album to feature Ace singing a song. And the song is, like I said, Shock Me. And the tour for Love Gun was pretty cool. Um, Love Gun, the Love Gun stage was probably one of the coolest stages I've ever seen out of Kiss in the '70s. And also, with their costumes, it's pretty cool. Also, and plus they had one of the coolest stage pieces ever, Sam the Serpent. And also, during that Love Gun Alive 2 era stage, Gene was experimenting with levitation for himself. So before he had the flying rig, he had a platform that levitated him up. However, he didn't have a microphone up with him, so this is kind of like before even the end of the road days. Once again, that's way too into the future of Kiss. So I gotta dial it back into '77 again. Anyways. So yeah, Gene was experimenting with levitation. He had a rising platform that took him a great way, but it rose him back down as the song was starting, which I gotta admit, that was cool. I like the fact how he would just do that demon walk to the stage and do the tongue thing at Sam the Serpent. That was always cool to me. And later comes to '78, and that leads us to two great things out of Kiss. One thing being the movie, Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. And good for us, but it's bad for Kiss. The movie was made by Hanna-Barbera, of all companies. And yeah, it's like even when I say it now, I still find it so weird. Hanna-Barbera, the company that makes Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, and all the other cartoon characters, was responsible for making Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. That is so weird and hilarious. The movie itself is cheesy as all get out, and Kiss themselves now don't like talking about the movie, but I think the movie is cool. I think there's fun to be had in cheesy movies, especially when Gene uses that voice modulator, which makes him sound interesting. Paul's really bad acting, especially during the "Let's go." That's interesting, and also hilarious. Peter's noticeable voice change, and all Ace sometimes gets lines, but all he says is "ah," which is that's hilarious to me. But I do say uh, we'll have to say Ace does get a few lines here and there in the movie. That's not all he says is "ah." But as funny as talking about the movie is, this was the beginning of the end for the original four. They were not getting along, and Peter and Ace were talking about leaving the band. So Bill O'Coin did not want to break up the band. They didn't want, no, Bill O'Coin didn't want the band to be broken up. So so he said, don't leave Kiss, do solo albums. And somehow that translated into all of them doing solo albums at the same time, which was a pretty interesting move. Gave them a break from everyone else and focused to work only on their own music, which is pretty cool. And each member's solo albums gives you an insight on what type of music that they like. Gene's solo album is all over the place. Paul and Ace's are the more Kiss-like out of the two. And Peter's, well, Peter's album is interesting also. Even though Peter's didn't sell as much as I'm guessing he would have liked, Ace's sold the most because he had the hit New York Groove. Gene's had like Radioactive. Peter's had a few good songs, at least if you ask me. Gene's also had more good songs than Peter's. Once again, if you ask me. But then came '79 because people thought Kiss was breaking up, and to make sure Kiss was not in fact breaking up, they made Dynasty, the quote-unquote disco album, or Kisco, as it's called. But no one else in the band liked the disco song on the album. But Paul, in fact, admitted to how he goes and at the time he went into these clubs, these places that plays disco music, and said, you can write these songs in your sleep and you have a hit in no time. This is easy. Well, true to his word, I Was Made for Loving You was a huge hit for them. And it also brought in some new faces that they did not care for. Mostly kids. Because they were getting teenagers at their concerts. And all of a sudden, this song comes out, and they were getting kids at their concerts. They really they really blew it with that one. If you ask an older fan, but the song itself is actually pretty good if you hear it live. What's cool about the Dynasty tour is they play the solo album songs. Gene gets Radioactive, Paul does Move On, Pierre does Toss and Turnin', and Ace does New York Groove. Makes sense. Later on in the Dynasty tour, they added in Christine 16 and Let Me Go Rock and Roll, which is also pretty cool. Sadly, during the Dynasty tour, the band was not getting along, to the point where Peter, I guess accidentally on purposely threw a drumstick at Gene. And during the Largo performance, he was drunk while singing Beth. So yeah, you know. So yeah, this was showing clear signs that the original four was not going to last. But the last thing that the original four did have that was pretty hilarious was the Tom Snyder interview. It's infamous and it's hilarious because Ace and Peter stole the spotlight away from Gene and Paul. Even if they were going out in a blaze of glory by stealing Gene and Paul's spotlight, which is pretty cool. Oh, and there's one thing I did forget to mention by accident. Also in '76, Kiss had a comic book with their own blood in it. So I thought that was pretty cool. Marvel was making the Kiss comic book, and Kiss was there to give them their actual blood. I thought that was pretty cool. Anyways, back to this. They stole the spotlight from Gene and Paul during that entire interview, and mostly it was Ace, because Ace came up with some really memorable quotes, like, I'm not a bass player, but I'm a trout player. Something like that. Something like that, yeah. And also, the very final show that was with the original four was in Fresno. So yeah, that's the last time that, the original four would ever play together on stage. So yeah, this was part one of me going through the history of Kiss. Tune in next time for part two.